Hello and welcome to our training on strategies for outreach and engagement in care. You just saw Sam entered into the chat. If you have any difficulties, please feel free to reach out to her so we can discuss. A note, we have our chat activated here, and if there are any security concerns during this training, we'll just go ahead and close out and you'll be sent some information about how to rejoin. But we're really pleased for today's discussion. Let's go ahead and take a look at our presenters. So we're joined today by Laura Collins, who's with Health Management Associates, and Sam's adding their bios to the chat. I'll provide a few highlights. Laura Collins is a licensed clinical social worker with over 25 years of experience in psychiatry and across the behavioral health spectrum. Really be pleased to be joined today by our partners from Painted Brain. So we have Dave Leone, who's been a social worker in Los Angeles for over 20 years and who has extensive experience in frontline social work. And we're also joined by Rachelle Chambers with Painted Brain. She is a expert in peer-based services and has experience in advocacy and practice training and how to integrate peer support in behavioral health services. So we're really pleased today to be joined by these presenters. A brief preview of our agenda. We'll be talking about effective principles for outreach and engagement and what we should be thinking about across that continuum of outreach, engagement, and retention. And then we'll talk about the engagement continuum, so actionable strategies for each stage of the engagement continuum. And then we'll discuss practical strategies. Tomorrow we have our open forum panel discussion, so we can follow up on any questions that we have, and also ask some panelists who will be joining today questions about what's worked and what's not in the field. So Sam will paste in our learning objectives for today. So you can take a look. The goal is that you will better be able to apply the best practices throughout the engagement continuum, identify those elements of trauma-informed and harm reduction approaches to be used in outreach and engagement, and also identify practical strategies to use with the care population in outreach and engagement activities. So that introduction, I'll turn the time over to Laura to get us started.
Thank you, Patricia. Good morning, everybody. It is great to be here with you today. We have just under an hour with you, and then again, we have the open forum tomorrow. So we'll try to cover as much as possible today and then continue the conversation tomorrow. So it's just starting with the principles for effective outreach and engagement. So really excited to be here with Dave and Rachelle with Painted Brain to join me in this conversation. But let's start with the why behind outreach and engagement and really the general impetus behind this training. So with CARE, we've been talking to the counties that have already implemented, and we definitely heard themes around both the challenges and creative strategies that the behavioral health teams are using in effectively engaging with the care respondent. So we heard a lot of insights from the behavioral health teams that resonate with the best practices that we'll be discussing today. So many of the themes are reflected on the slide. I mean, generally, we're hearing about the importance of the person-centered approach that is not only trauma-informed and non-judgmental, but most importantly, flexible and creative. And today we'll be talking about a few other themes, the importance of being patient, being persistent and consistent, which ties in with persistence, right? Letting the person know you'll be back and when. We heard quite a bit about the importance of providing a team approach when engaging, and typically in pairs, and importantly, including a peer on the team, which we'll discuss further with Dave and Rachelle, who are here. We also heard from counties about their cross-collaboration efforts, for example, between Counsel for the Respondent and the county BH teams, and supporting those initial outreach and engagement activities. And then finally, the behavioral health teams have talked a lot about, wanting to be generous and sharing their strategies, sharing their creative approaches. And again, we'll hear more tomorrow on those approaches as well at the open forum. So the blue box on the slide here reflects the key principles behind effective outreach and engagement that we'll touch on before we dig into some more specific practical strategies related to this working care. So let's go to the next slide. So today we're really focusing on informal engagement approaches or strategies versus the more formal strategies that a lot of us are trained in, those more formal structured approaches. So we're again starting with what a person-centered approach looks like. And Dave, I'm going to hand it to you. If you could speak to the importance of acceptance, respect, flexibility, transparency, all those key elements of that person-centered approach when engaging with care respondent.
Thank you so much, Laura. It's really a pleasure to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity. Welcome, everybody. Again, good morning. Being person-centered is really about trying to really meet the person where they are at, as it says on the slide, which means accepting them as they are, not trying to have them fit into your preconceptions of what a person should be or how they should be presenting to you, kind of taking them in fully and accepting them where they are, where their emotions are, where their anxiety is, their environment. You also want to really be thinking about how to be really flexible while you're connecting with this person. So that means you might want to be really ready to change your approach, change your voice tone, change your sort of posture, and try to match the person the best you can to meet them where they are and do the best you can to connect using your own intuition. And finally, transparency is about really being genuine and present and open. So if you're anxious, don't act like you're not anxious. If you're feeling uncomfortable, it's okay to be a little bit uncomfortable. What you want to do is just be very genuine with your feelings and very transparent with sort of your own reactions and not have other agendas in your back of your mind while you're trying to connect with this person. Thanks so much, Laura.
Thanks, Dave. We'll just keep moving along. Let's talk a little bit about the trauma-informed approach. So really a person-centered approach, like Dave sort of quickly covered for us, is also trauma-informed, right? So really trauma-informed care itself, just to give you a brief overview, it's that key set of principles that essentially promotes a feeling of safety, a feeling of empowerment, a feeling of true support, true collaboration, and really, of course, embraces the principles of cultural humility and equity that we'll talk about shortly as well. And just for again a quick overview, trauma-informed approach means assuming that the trauma in someone's past may be impacting the way they are responding to a situation, including their interaction with you. So just keeping that in mind when you're having those interactions. So if someone, is standoffish because they may have been traumatized in the past by an authority figure, let's say. It's really about shifting that focus from sort of pointing the finger, what's wrong with you sort of approach versus, hey, I'd really like to hear what happened to you. What happened here? What are you going through? And so this slide really summarizes some key outreach and engagement strategies that a trauma-informed approach embraces. And I'm going to hand it to Rochelle to talk a little bit more about these, the creation of a non-threatening environment, and like what Dave talked about with the body language and then in your tone. Again, person-centered approach. It's the theme today. Building trust. Communication is clear. Just again, reiterating what Dave was talking about with that transparency, that authenticness. And active listening we'll talk about as well. And again, going at the individual's pace. So patience is another theme today as well. Building the community supports and encouraging self-care is also a very important component of trauma-informed care among your team as well. But I'll hand it to Rachel to talk a little bit more about what that looks like with outreach and engagement.
Thank you. I think you covered most of it, but I think one of the biggest things as well is like you said, creating a safe and emotional and physical space when you're doing outreach. And that's how you show up in your affect and your clothing, your approach. And then the biggest thing is the involvement of the recipient in the treatment process. That's a big component of the trauma informed approach. The client needs a voice in their own treatment, a part of the planning and an active role in decision making. So, like in traditional care, clinicians usually dictate, the course of action. But when you take a trauma informed approach, particularly in like outreach, you're asking the recipient, what do you think about? What is your feedback in the care? What direction do you want your care to be? And as we'll talk about more, really the secret sauce we believe to
Mhm.
trauma informed care is the peer. The peer is key to establishing safety and hope and really those cross collaborations. So in addition to those really key points of just showing up authentic and making sure you have self-care and a plan, we believe that you can create a safe, person-centered environment for the recipient where there'll be more recipient to participating in the program. Next slide. Thank you, Laura.
Thanks, Rachel. So let's move to cultural humility very quickly as well, because we have so much to cover. But for those of you that have participated in our series on trauma-informed care, we do talk about this other principle. And really, it's an approach to effective outreach and engagement. It's critical. That is cultural humility. And that's really about both centering and empowering someone else's experience and someone else's culture. So, just broadly, what cultural humility looks like, it's knowing and recognizing that others are the expert of their own culture, their own values, their beliefs, asking about their experience, their knowledge, their resources that can be leveraged to support them. And just again, being sure to collaborate and be flexible. So just think about how you might use cultural humility as an approach when you're doing outreach and engagement with the care participant or respondent. So think about the racial, ethnic, and linguistic groups that they might be a part of, put those assumptions aside, asking them to share their own experiences again, as I mentioned, their knowledge, their resources. And then really thinking about um, communicating a positive attitude towards their culture and acknowledging your own limitations and understanding their culture. That's so much an important part of this approach, including any similarities you might have. And then we'll talk a little bit more about this in a minute. Consider your biases that might get in the way of building rapport through those outreach and engagement efforts. Dave, do you want to add anything to this related to this work?
So well said, Laura. I appreciate that. Yeah, well, I think that one of the things that I want to think about myself when I'm thinking about cultural humility is really understanding and recognizing that my own cultural identity is not the right one or the correct one. It's just an example of sort of cultural identity and self-knowledge. What you really want to do is bring a very curious and open-minded sort of response to the person that you're trying to connect with and really express that curiosity by trying to learn about them, learn about their sense of their identity and their cultural connections and valences, being really open to learning about the respondents' culture and their sense of their where they come from, what they think about the world, where they sort of situate themselves within the world. And then I think the last part of that, which is sort of inherent for all of us, is really doing the work to learn, to read, to continue to expose yourself to situations where you might feel not the center, and to really be humble about knowing yourself and knowing other people and learning other people. And here's my cat saying hi too. And yeah, thank you so much, Laura. Appreciate that.
Thanks, Dave. Let's keep moving through some of these key principles here. So now
Mhm.
we're going to touch quickly on the harm reduction approach and really how this is critical to an effective outreach and engagement strategy. And really it aligns nicely, right, with trauma-informed care, with that person-centered approach, and definitely ties in with cultural humility as well. And just broadly, for those of you that are new to the concept of harm reduction, it's really sort of developed as a public health strategy that was developed to minimize the negative consequences associated with various human behaviors, so often related to substance use, but it really does also apply to other behavioral health issues, including serious mental illness. And it's generally about approaching individuals without judgment and supporting them where they're at. And so harm reduction really means approaching someone from a place of supporting the individual's basic safety needs and, and their well-being versus jumping right into treatment recommendations, or especially before any trust or rapport has been built with the individual. So during outreach and engagement, consider the ways that you can incorporate harm reduction principles into your approach. So you want to think about engaging first. So establishing that connection with the individual, which we're going to get into in a few minutes. And then again, what we're already hearing, building trust through that genuine and non-judgmental interaction. And then listening. And we'll talk a little bit about active listening today as well. But part of that is showing that empathy. There's that trauma-informed approach, that empathy and that validation, and understanding what their experiences are, listening to their needs, respecting their autonomy, and that there's an empowerment component to that, right? In terms of really acknowledging the individual's right to make their own choices, and even through the care process, which is a very important message. And also just that concept of acceptance or hospitality, thinking about how you can really reinforce that welcoming, that safe, that non-threatening environment. And I always love the term unconditional positive regard, just again, accepting individuals as they are, where they are. And this is kind of a concept of motivational interviewing as well, assisting, not directing. So really just assisting with what resources they're asking for versus imposing those solutions to them, and collaboration again, to identify those goals. And again, really the hub of the harm reduction approach is that promotion of safety. So just really thinking about mitigating risks and promoting safety at that very moment. What can you provide to them to help them in the moment to stay safer? And then we'll move to the next slide. And we'll just talk briefly about mitigating bias. And again, a very important concept that we want to think about while we're working to effectively outreach and engage these individuals. So just again, a brief overview. Bias is a positive or negative tendency resulting in attitudes, decisions, behaviors, and actions that are prejudiced in favor of or against something or someone compared to another. So the concept of implicit bias is basically one form of bias that really occurs unconsciously. So biases and kind of the actions we take based on these biases are really developed through our life experiences, our cultural contexts, our learnings, the media. And honestly, it's important to know we're sort of hardwired to have a bias. It's actually a protective factor that's a holdover from early existence. Safety came from people and things we understood, and danger was kind of in the unknown. So it's kind of validating. It's like we all have implicit bias. So then what do we do about that? So in an ideal world, we'd completely do away with biases and, but honestly, we're all human. So while we're doing this work to identify and address our bias, we still want to work to control those biases and reduce that impact on the individuals around us and the care respondents that we're working with. So there's a few sort of bullets here in terms of approaches and things to think about to help mitigate that kind of unconscious implicit bias. That whole person approach that you're thinking about, versus relying on those stereotypes that can inform our biases. Just awareness, self-awareness of your own actions, your own behavior, thinking about your facial expressions, your body language, and ensuring that you're communicating as you best you can, respectfully, inclusively, trying to avoid those unintentional displays of discomfort or judgment. It's really important, that heightened self-awareness, that's really what this is speaking to. And then finally, examining power dynamics that minimize the other's experiences. So if you think about it, there are those inherent power dynamics throughout our culture, right? But especially in the types of relationships inherent in the care process. So we've got the client and the clinician, we've got the respondent, the care respondent, and the judge. And then we have also, the dynamic with counsel. So there's all these different power dynamics. So just kind of, again, so much of mitigating bias is an awareness of those dynamics, an awareness of your own behavior, your own actions, and again, really, embracing the whole person approach in terms of knowing the individual versus stereotyping the individual. I'm going to hand it to Rachel to chime in on this as well.
Well, you covered it so eloquently. I'll briefly add my thoughts. But as Patricia put in the chat, or the staff, there is a training, and please look at that training on biases. But the main points that I wanted to highlight, it's really important. Dave and I self run a small behavioral organization and do practice training for young up and coming clinicians. And some of the main things that we've been addressing at our company is really the idea of assessing your biases on a consistent level is vital to becoming and staying an effective behavioral health professional. This can be done in supervision through finding a trusted ally to process those biases with. I think I do that a lot with Dave. And then there's various, self validated tools to assess personally your biases and implicit biases. So definitely check out that training to look at those tools. They were really helpful for me, especially as someone who grew up very religious, had all kind of thoughts and of my perceptions of how I thought the people that I served was supposed to be, because I was hardwired that way. It's really a day-to-day work, and your environment and your organization and supervisor really should be supporting that. And just like being real, like we're in downtown. The folks that we're going to be interacting with, might trigger or bring up some of those biases of what you perceive to be normal or correct, whether it be because they might be homeless, they might have poor hygiene, their speech might be different. So really checking yourself and really being able to process that in a safe environment, I believe that will to help you mitigate biases, but also promote self-care among clinicians and really help you grow. And I can go on and on about this, but please check out the other training, and I'll pass it back to Laura.
Thanks, Rachel. I know so much to cover today. Let's just move and pause quickly to move to our first idea and action moment. So, we've covered these core principles behind effective outreach and engagement. So let's think about what strengths you might bring to the table. And I'm going to kind of prompt Dave and Rachel to respond. So, thinking about what strengths can you leverage in terms of what we've talked about? And you've already sort of spoken to that a little bit, both Dave and Rachel. And also on the flip side, what are some areas that you need to develop? What are some weaknesses that are being called out? Kind of, again, Rachel, you were talking about those hardwired biases that you have to keep in check as well. So I don't know, Dave and Rachel, if there's anything that you want to speak to on the ideas in action.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, I think that one of the strengths that I sort of bring to the table myself, and I don't know where this comes from, but I tend to naturally sort of adjust my level of intensity and energy to the person I'm working with. So somebody that's very high intensity, I tend to go high intensity also. Somebody that's very mellow and soft spoken, I'll also become very soft spoken sort of automatically. Um, and I also like to really meet the person where they are. So I feel very comfortable if somebody is sitting on the ground on the cement, I'll just sit down with them, not too close, but not too far away. And I want to really level the playing field in a very literal way by joining with them on the ground. One of my weaknesses, I think I have sort of the confidence of the average white man that we always hear about. And I really need to be very aware of sort of that, watching for my own resistance to self-doubt and really accepting that I don't know everything and I want to be continually open. I really appreciate the comment from Gazelle on the chat that it's really important to keep reviewing sort of our own biases and our own challenges as we go in this work and don't take our years of experience as a given. So yeah, thanks. I want to pass that on to Rachelle and see if you have thoughts on this too.
Yeah, I like that point too. And I think me and Dave hold each other to that, to all those. My strength, and I'll go quick, I know we have a lot to cover, is I believe is my lived experience. Being someone that's interacted with the law enforcement, the court system, the psychiatric system. I mean, and me living in downtown, opening an office in downtown, like I mean, I think that that's what makes me like who I am. I can get out there. I can meet people. I understand like the dynamics. It comes with experience, like safety. I had to learn, but I'm super confident in my lived experience. But I still have to check myself though. That's when and my weaknesses come in is the biases, and I continuously have to process that with multiple disciplinary of folks, particularly because I have certain ways of how I think people should live, and I have to be like, is this like my way or like, so I think having those safe people that I can process my biases with, and then being able to develop use my strengths to leverage and develop programs and train folks on breaking down those biases, is how it works. And hopefully we did a good idea in action.
You did. Yeah, it's really about getting everyone in the audience thinking too, right? So thank you for sharing. So let's jump into the engagement continuum and go to the next slide. Yes, so we're calling it the engagement continuum, outreach, engagement, retention, but honestly, there's a lot of overlap here. If you think about it, of course, engagement strategies are key to outreach and they're key to retention. But really to help us, for the sake of structuring the conversation, we'll kind of walk through each component this morning. So just super quick during that initial outreach, you just basically want to focus on establishing that contact, beginning to build that rapport, and getting that connection going. And then, as the engagement progresses, maintaining consistent communication and support that helps strengthen that rapport, and foster that deeper connection. And then the retention, which is often neglected. And we do hear a lot about that, that, you've engaged someone maybe in care, but keeping them engaged, sustaining that relationship. What are some strategies there in terms, of, truly helping them engage in treatment ongoing, and services outgoing. All right, I'm going to hand it to Dave to give us a case example that we'll walk through today as well.
Thank you so much, Laura. So I'm going to introduce our team to Marcus, who's a fictional care respondent. Marcus is a 46-year-old veteran who's experiencing schizophrenia and is currently houseless. He served in the Army for 10 years, and that's a big part of his personal identity. Marcus experiences PTSD, so he has potential for flashbacks, for hypervigilance. He's also got hypertension, so he's got some medical challenges and some chronic pain from past injuries. Marcus has a history of alcohol use disorders and sort of inconsistent use of medications, which includes both psychiatric medications like antipsychotics and antidepressants, and also the medication for hypertension. So he's been kind of on and off of medication and sometimes mistrustful of medication. It was Marcus's brother that submitted a care petition. And so that's a really important part that we'll come back to down the road a little bit to think about sort of how to incorporate that kind of information. And one thing that outreach workers have noticed about Marcus is that his symptoms of schizophrenia seem to be worsening. His hypervigilance is up, he's guarded, he's sometimes responding to voices. And he's not necessarily a very easy person to approach. So we really want to think about preparing for the outreach and approach, which we'll go on to in the next slide. So the goal in preparing for outreach, this is really something you do before you get out onto the streets or go to meet with this person in person, is you want to really figure out, with all the knowledge base that you have and the information that you can access, what are the best strategies for connecting with Marcus on the street? What are his interests? What are his triggers? What are sort of good ways to make that initial connection? You can get that information from a lot of different places, and you want to really use the resources available to you. So one resource available is actually working with the other agencies that are already working with Marcus. What do they know about him? What do they know about his sort of tendencies and curiosities and interests? And what are some things that might really set him off or make the connection more difficult? Another area to look at is really looking at the petition itself. What was written about this person? What was it about Marcus that sort of required his brother to write a petition to suggest care court? And what information can you glean about Marcus from that? And then you might actually also want to consider talking to the petitioner himself or family members that know Marcus so that you can really prepare and understand what drives Marcus, what are his interests, what are his hobbies, what are good things to use as an initial way to connect with him. Let's go on to the next slide. Once you're on the scene of actually trying to meet with Marcus, you don't want to just rush up and talk to him and sort of, assert yourself into his space. You want to take a moment to really sit back and observe what you can before engaging. So you don't want to rush up on him. You want to take in, like, what's the environment? Is it a clean environment? Is it a really rough environment? Are there a lot of things on the ground around Marcus, like a lot of cigarette butts or empty beer cans? Or is it incredibly clean? Is he in front of a gas station or a very busy area, or is he in a more remote part of maybe downtown Los Angeles where there are less people? And what does that say about sort of his needs and his connections? How intense is the scene where you see him? Then you want to think about, like, what can you visually sort of take in from what Marcus's presentation in the world is? You're looking for things that you might be able to use as, that first step of contact. So you're looking for jewelry, for tattoos. Is he wearing a specific T-shirt? Is he really demonstrating to you that he's been in the service by wearing maybe a military hat or military insignia or something that indicates his army presence? Is he wearing dog tags? Or is he keeping all that stuff hidden so that maybe you get a sense that connecting through his service is not a great connection? And you want to actually look at if there's any tattoos that you can comment on and use as a first sort of engagement process. Another thing you want to think about in observing, you want to observe sort of his state of mind. Is he very wary and hypervigilant at the moment? Is he very relaxed? But you also want to kind of expect that as you approach this person with your peer or team member, that he's going to probably be mistrustful, not know who you are, and not be super engaged with you right off the bat. So you want to sort of prepare for that and be okay with the fact that he's going to be wary and that that's a very healthy and normal reaction to you as a new person. The last thing you want to do is really do an internal reflection of how am I responding to what I'm seeing? How do I feel about the environment where I see Marcus? How do I feel about his visual presentation? What am I reacting to? What kinds of biases or assumptions am I automatically making? What's my comfort level? So that I can be aware of that and try to come across as incredibly genuine and present and not come in with assumptions or anything like that. Let's move on to actually then making the connection in the next slide. What you want to do is very sort of gradually and gently approach Marcus or the person that you're trying to approach as a respondent and start off with just a very basic introduction and getting a sense of how they're doing. What's going on with you today? How are you doing today? What's the day been like for you so far? You want to then use really open-ended language to get a sense of anything that you can help this person with immediately. By providing an immediate need of some kind or identifying something that they're struggling with immediately is really a good way to develop trust and safety and demonstrate yourself as a consistent caregiver and a very present person. You also want to get a sense if you're going with a team member or paired up with another sort of professional or a peer professional, you want to notice like who is it that Marcus or the respondent is more connected to automatically, and then let that person take the lead. So you might be the one that's sort of preparing, but then you notice that he's actually making better eye contact with your partner. So you want to maybe let the partner take the lead on that. The last thing that I want to think you want to think about here is really not trying to push this person to answer questions that they're uncomfortable with. You want to use your intuition and your sort of empathy to understand how is this person reacting to the questions you're asking. And you also want to really try to see the world from his perspective and try to observe the world from where he is as opposed to bringing yourself in. Let's move on to the next slide here. De-escalation is a very complicated topic, and this is just a very basic overview of how to think about de-escalation. It's predictable at some level that the person you're talking to, who you're trying to reach through this process, might be escalated by even talking to you, might become agitated or upset while you're talking, and you want to be very aware and responsive to that. A couple of general topics, and this is definitely worth looking into further and looking at the resources provided by Sam on the side here. You want to give the person space. You don't want to get too physically close, stand 2 to 3 feet away from them. You want to demonstrate openness and calmness with your voice tone, with your presence. You don't want to cross your arms or look down at the person. You want to be very open-minded and open-spaced with your body and think about your body tone. You want to validate the feelings and intensity of the person's experience. If they're really upset, it's like, hey, you seem really upset, and I can understand why. You don't know who I am. You're in an intense situation. So you're really validating that person's feelings. You want to join with the person in facing the challenges that they're experiencing. You don't want to have the challenge between you and the person. You want to sort of join with them and see it from their perspective. You don't want to take the bait. If they start asking you a lot of challenging questions or get more assertive to you, don't be defensive. Don't try to challenge everything. Don't try to take everything at face value, and recognize sort of how you're feeling in reaction to the person. Try to remain calm, try to take some deep breaths, and always offer options and choices. Don't ever be demanding. Don't expect things from this person. Use silence and listening techniques. And then the last thing to really be aware of is that if the de-escalation is not working, it's better to just sort of walk away and try another day. You don't want to stick it out and prove that you can sort of manage the situation. You want to be very flexible and okay with the fact that you might need to just leave and give this person some space and come back at a different time. Thanks. Let's move on to some tips from outreach workers. So the information on this page is actually coming from folks like yourselves and other outreach teams that we've talked to in this process. It's really important to really be yourself and be okay with your own comforts and discomforts. You don't want to show bravado or act like you're more calm than you are, because that really interferes with your genuineness. You want to avoid over-identifying with the person. So you don't want to say things like, I know what you're going through, I've been there too, I can imagine what you're feeling. You want to really give that person the space to describe themselves and not try to assume that you understand or know anything about them or their experiences in the world. You also want to allow the person to mistrust you and allow them to maybe even dislike you at first, and not be defensive about that and not try to prove that you're an awesome, trustable person. Allow the person to come to you in their gradual way. You might even want to say that verbally, like, it makes sense that you don't trust me yet. Who am I to you? So you're actually acknowledging and validating their feelings towards you. You want to think and breathe before speaking. You want to take your time in responding. Unlike I'm doing right now, you want to slow down your process. You want to take the time to connect and think about how you're responding. If you're getting triggered or feeling overwhelmed yourself, you want to recognize that in yourself and not try to push through it, but actually maybe disengage, pass to your partner, or actually walk away and come back on a different day if you're getting overwhelmed. Don't assume, don't diagnose, and really try to practice emotional generosity. You're giving a lot of care and attention to this person without an expectation to get it back from them. It's okay if they don't like you. It's okay if they don't connect with you. You try not to need that back from that person in order to connect. Thanks a lot. Let's move on. Go ahead, Laura.
Yeah, sure. So now we're just kind of moving forward. We've talked a lot about outreach, and we'll move forward on that continuum and talk more about engagement. And again, this is fluid in terms of engagement strategies are happening throughout this continuum. But I'll hand it back to you, I believe, Dave, to talk a little bit about establishing a rapport and connectedness.
Absolutely. So this slide actually just refers to a couple of different kinds of rapport building techniques: verbal techniques, psychological techniques, and nonverbal techniques. In the interest of time, let's move forward into verbal techniques. The next slide. Laura is going to talk a little bit about the OARS technique of connecting and developing rapport. So go for it, Laura.
Yeah, and again, I'll be brief on this. I suspect a lot of you in the audience are familiar with motivational interviewing, or MI as we call it, and those reflective listening skills. And just this is just a nice sort of snapshot of really what I see as the cornerstone of MI, are the OARS skills. So using those open-ended questions versus questions that kind of ask for a yes/no answer. Again, it's a way to get to know more about the individual and really, again, promote a conversation. Using affirmations as a way to, it's kind of a reflective listening skill. To really show that you're listening. And also it's kind of a way to acknowledge a strength as you are listening to what they're sharing. And reflecting is a great skill. It's important to practice reflection, but a very great skill in terms of reflecting back often the feeling that they're sharing with you. And it's also a way to double check that you're on the right track. And summarizing is the same way. I often use it to sometimes redirect the conversation if I need, if it's time to move on to another topic, but it's also a great way to just check that you're on the same page in terms of what you've heard. So I'll hand it back to you, Dave, in terms of talking about some of those authentic communication skills.
Excellent. Thank you, Laura. So authenticity is really about really being genuine and being present and being yourself. You want to emphasize patience. You want to emphasize allowing the respondent to take the lead of the conversation. You really want to pay attention. So you want to put away your phone. You don't want to have your cat on your lap. You definitely do not want to have a clipboard out so that you're taking notes. You want to just be very present and open and not distracted. It's really important to use good eye contact and appropriate eye contact. If that person's looking away from you a lot, you don't want to sort of stare at them. You want to sort of match their eye contact as well. You want to demonstrate that you're listening and that you're sincere and that you're there to care and support this person. And if you need to take some time to think about something and you're needing some silence, it might be good to narrate that silence. Like, hey, I just want to think about what you just said and think about how I want to respond to that, because I really take what you said as very important. Now we're going to move on to some psychological techniques in the next slide. What you want to do here psychologically is really avoid the reflex you have to make the situation right or fix everything. You don't want to fix everything. You can't fix everything. So you want to be accepting of that. You always want to validate the person's feelings and emotions. And even if the person is talking about things that might be hallucinatory or delusional in some way, you don't want to challenge those topics. You want to recognize the reality of what the person's feeling and validate the intensity or the sort of presence of that emotional state. You earn trust over time. You don't need to demonstrate and get their trust immediately. Letting the person distrust you is actually part of that development of trust. You want to be genuine, you want to be predictable, and you want to follow through with things you say that you're going to do. If there's something that you inadvertently promise this person and then you can't follow through, don't ignore it. Try to bring that up next time and say like, hey, I got ahead of myself by saying I could do this thing for you, which I can't. I apologize. Again, you want to demonstrate that genuineness and openness to being wrong about things. You can't rush the trust. You need to let it give it the time and allow the person to develop their trust with you over the period that it takes, whatever that is. And then let's move on to nonverbals as well. Some of the ways that we want to connect with a person nonverbally is really having a wide range. Can we move to the next slide? having a wide range of options for how to spend time with this person that don't require a lot of verbal connection. So there are a lot of versions of that. You might want to bring along some puzzles, drawing materials, something to listen to music with, maybe a board game or a card game. You want to try to find, maybe even by asking or by testing things out, what is going to allow you and this person to connect with each other and spend time together that doesn't require a lot of verbal connection or verbal interaction. Some people really do way better by walking and talking. So that might be an option you keep open. It's just like, let's take a walk around the block or let's find another place to sit down together. That might be a better place for communication. You want to be very okay with silence and you want to be comfortable with yourself and with this person. So you might need to calm yourself down in order to be comfortable with their silence as well. You don't want to rush things. And if they're silent, you don't want to overcompensate by talking too much yourself. Um, you want to think about how their environment is affecting the person in front of you, the respondent, and also how it's affecting you. You might want to suggest, like, hey, maybe we should find somewhere that's got less people around so that we might be more comfortable. Or maybe this person feels much more comfortable when there's a lot of commotion and noise around them. So you want to be very responsive to where they're at. Thanks. Let's move on. Appreciate it.
And we've made it to retention. So I'm going to hand the mic to Rachel to talk a little bit about some retention strategies. Rachel?
Yes, so we want to move to the next slide. Awesome. So it's really important. Retention is like a very critical piece to the engagement continuum. All the activities that we're doing, engagement activities, do not stop once the respondent agrees to participate in care. So all the strategies that we discussed previously will continue to need to be employed as we continue to work with the respondents. Specifically, as you see on the slide, like continuing to be genuine, I mean, it is really important to bring transparency, as Dave said, and just demonstrate a sense of willingness to help and authenticity and cultural humility. Remembering life details, that's really important. It was really important to me one time when I was in the hospital, and a nurse had remembered that I told her that my late sister was a nurse. And then when I was having like a freak out, she was like, she'd remembered that I told her that my sister was a nurse and how she would want me to, to do this. And it just like was like, wow, this is, that was really amazing that she remembered that life detailed. And like Dave was saying, continue to be curious. I think that that's something for seasoned, new behavioral health professionals. It's something that we should continue to train on, engaging individuals, recipients with the framework of curiosity, of wanting to know, things about them. For example, like maybe saying, the last time we met, you were telling me about your dog. I love dogs. I have a pet. What's your favorite animal? Or do you have what's the name of your dog? So I think that, that curiosity and remembering things about folks is really important. And then to continue, someone mentioned in the chat about continuing to encourage those natural connections and support, including the natural or informal supports that the respondent prefers. For example, if you heard a recipient say, oh, you mentioned your buddy last time, Joe, have you seen him since the last time we talked? Really promoting connections. That's one of the big things that we do at Painted Brain, is really promote social connections and community connections. And then as Dave mentioned again, like we already mentioned about the importance of following through on your promises, and using caution and discretion in making guarantees, or using statements or concrete statements. And a good model that we've heard from the teams is under promise and over deliver. I think that that's a really good model. We'll go to the next slide to talk a little bit more about shared decision making. And this is different from supported decision making, which I'll give you a definition about, but I really want to focus on supported decision making. And I kind of wanted to, I know we're a little short on time, but kind of wanted to set the framework because it gets kind of confusing. But NIH describes shared decision making as an approach where clinicians and clients share the best available evidence when faced with the task of making decisions, and where the clients are supported to consider options to achieve informed preferences. So I'd say by using supported decision making models, we can build and maintain therapeutic support. We want the client to be fully engaged in care. And to do this, they need to feel informed and a part of every decision making. And I think that makes me feel empowered as someone that has been hospitalized, that's been in situations, because I've often had all my decisions taken or just dictated to me. And I do know best. Like, I know what medicines have made me more psychotic. So there are things that I can inform the clinician. So that shared decision is important. And just real quick, for example, when our vignette for Marcus, talking to Marcus about what is important to him and how the services and supports can help him reach his goals can increase retention. For example, as Dave mentioned, Marcus has some health concerns, including hypertension, chronic pain, alcohol use disorder. Does he want to work towards addressing those health issues? Does he have quality of life goals or activities that he can no longer do because of his health issues? His brother completed the petition for Marcus to participate. Does Marcus want to foster his relationships with his brother or other family members? So those are just some steps that we think are important with shared decision making. And I think in an open forum, we'll talk if you have questions about the difference between supported decision making. Next slide. So I am going to pose this question to Dave. But think about Marcus. How could you seek to build trust and rapport throughout the outreach, engagement, and retention continuum? And I don't know if you want to break it up or just so that folks can see how that we can keep the engagement.
That sounds great. Thanks, Rachel. I appreciate that. I think that for the outreach, just to review some things we've talked about earlier, at the outreach stage, you want to do your homework, understand what the petition says, talk to agencies that Marcus is involved with, maybe talk to the family members or the petitioner himself. Get a sense of what Marcus is most likely to connect with you on and what might set him off and make him distrust you. During the engagement process, you want to really, as Rachel just said, try to keep in mind and remember things that he said about himself and his interests, his hobbies, and bring them back in future meetings so that you can demonstrate that you're listening, that you're paying attention, and that you really care about this person. You want to keep exploring in the engagement phase ways to spend time together that will allow you to develop trust and rapport with him. Test out different options like card games, drawing, things like that, listening to music. And then in retention, you want to keep sort of very present in your mind, like, how is this relationship going? You don't want to ever take it for granted. Ask questions like, is there anything that you notice that might make us feel more comfortable with each other or might make you feel more comfortable with me? And you want to really develop a sort of consistency and memory about what drives Marcus and what kinds of information he might respond to well if you bring it up again in the future. As Rachel gave a great example of, if he mentions something about a family member or a past experience, it's really great to take notes afterwards and then bring that back to the conversation when you meet with him again to demonstrate that you're listening and that you genuinely care about Marcus's well-being. Thanks so much. Just a couple ideas.
Thank you. I think we can go to the next slide.
All right. So in our last few minutes together, we'll talk a little bit about practical strategies. We'll also be talking about sharing some practical strategies tomorrow. So just a quick overview in terms of the team. We haven't really talked about the team. So often what we're hearing from the 8 counties that have rolled out is that they are employing assertive community treatment or ACT or full service partnership or FSP type teams. The actual team or teams that have that same configuration, which is really a multidisciplinary wraparound approach, really supposed to be available after hours, in the odd hours, and really, again, working in the field. So very much an outreach emphasis with these teams. And they definitely engage with individuals in typically in pairs. Um, Ideally, we've heard that already, pairs versus a larger group and pairs versus one person. So, and the other thing we're really hearing from the counties is that they have at least one peer support specialist, a peer type, someone with lived experience on the team as well. So in the blue box, you see the typical roles of outreach teams, a social worker or a mental health counselor, that's in a case manager type role. These teams need a prescriber. Again, a peer role on a peer support specialist role is key. Some teams have engaged with the CHW or community health worker role. A lot of teams we're hearing have homeless outreach specialists. We also, tomorrow at the open forum, we'll hear about the IHOT team. I think that's in-home outreach team, if I got the acronym correct. That really has that specialist or that group of specialists on the team that typically also employ peers. And then, depending on who you're outreaching, you may have other individuals on that team that may have a medical focus, a nurse or an SUD counselor, maybe a housing navigator. So again, it's really about building a robust multidisciplinary team in your outreach efforts, and then being thoughtful about who actually is going out for those initial outreach efforts, and then who's engaging regularly, and then who's on that kind of retention end of the work. And I'm going to hand it back to Rachel to talk a little bit about the peer role in outreach and engagement and care.
Yes, as I noted, my mentor, Karis Myrick, likes to say that the peer is really the secret sauce to really engagement to the whole continuum of this. But as Laura was saying, it's really important to, involve peers in the full treatment process and outreach process, and prioritizing their lived experience as the best strategy to really engage the recipient. And then some of the points that is highlighted here is strategizing priority. The peer is really good at building rapport. They're really good at connecting on their lived experience. As I noted, my lived experience, I really believe, has helped me be able to connect when I'm out in downtown, or I'm usually in areas where there's, a large houseless population, because of my experience. And I know, I feel very comfortable and non-judgmental. And I believe that the peer is really the key to that. And then, as we noted, one of the promising strategies is peer support. And so them being a part of the team is not just a secondary, thought, but really being a thought partner, as I noted, will really help in the treatment process. And Laura, I don't know if we want to go to the next slide in the interest of time, but we'll talk more about peers and their role.
Definitely tomorrow too. Yes, thank you, Rachel. Yes, we are kind of at the top of the hour, or actually midway, but an hour in, and this is just a nice summary slide that kind of recaps what we've talked about today. So honestly, it's patience, persistence, and consistency. You sort of started with that, and the quality of the interaction versus the quantity of the interaction. And we're going to hear more about that tomorrow as well. Dave talked a lot about creativity and curiosity. Same with Rachel in terms of the approach and really promoting, slowly building that trust and rapport, and really reframing success for the team so that they understand that, baby steps, those small successes are huge successes really when you're engaging this population. And then really, again, supporting the individual's rights, empowering them, you know, and thinking about, as Dave talked about, and Rachel, those other ways to engage that may be non-conversational, non-verbal approaches, and then letting the client direct. And then again, I think we've been hearing a lot from courts and from counties actually is working with the court on some of those timelines around engaging. And sometimes, you know, we're hearing that the courts are granting extensions based on the fact that the individual may need a little more time to engage, but they're making progress. So that's something we just want to throw out there, and we can definitely follow up tomorrow. And I'll hand it to Patricia.
Thanks, Laura and Painted Brains. So just a note, we do have the open forum tomorrow. We'll be talking about a lot of those practical strategies. There'll also be time for Q&A and a great panel discussion. So we hope you can join us. If you have questions or you want to make sure you can join the open forum tomorrow, please feel free to email us, and Sam will put the email address right there, and go ahead and reach out. And we look forward to continuing the conversation tomorrow. So thanks for the presenters and thanks everyone who joined.